Let's start with something a bit uncomfortable. A lot of the time, the person who gets hurt the most is the one who knows best how to be good. Yeah, the one who's loyal, who understands, who's patient, who doesn't play games, ends up with the wrong person more than anyone else. And that part is painful because that person never entered the relationship with bad intentions. They didn't manipulate. They didn't try to control. They didn't want to hurt anyone. They just wanted something real. But what happens in the end? The person who was supposed to bring peace becomes the biggest source of stress. So the question is, why? Why do the more logical, kinder people fall into toxic relationships more often than those who are cold or detached? Why do the ones who care less get hurt less, but the ones who love deeply break more? This isn't luck. It's a pattern that, if you don't understand it, will repeat itself with different people in different situations, but with the same result. You, tired, confused, and more broken. Here's a truth many people don't want to hear. Good people often don't have boundaries, not because they are weak. No, many of them are actually mentally strong. They can endure. They understand. They regulate their emotions. But that's exactly the problem. They can so much that at some point, they stop noticing they are crossing their own limits. Somewhere in their mind, a wrong definition of being good was formed, a dangerous one. They believe, if I tolerate more equals, I'm a better person. If I forgive more equals, I save the relationship. If I understand more equals, they'll change. And this is where the real mistake begins. Because now, you're playing the wrong role. You think you're a partner, but you become a therapist, a rescuer, or even a victim the moment everything starts. It doesn't begin with a fight. It starts quietly, with a belief, I have to fix this. When you see someone who's broken, who has wounds, who behaves in confusing ways, you have two choices: walk away or get involved. Good people almost always choose the second. They say, it's okay, I'll help them. They're just hurt. I'm different. I can change them. And that is exactly where a toxic relationship begins. Not with betrayal, not with chaos, but with hope for change. Because the other person isn't looking to change. They are looking for someone who will tolerate them. Toxic relationships don't start with love. They start with justification. At the beginning, everything feels amazing. Sometimes too amazing. So much attention, long messages, intensity, strong emotions, beautiful words, big promises. You think, finally, someone who understands me. But here's something important. That intense beginning is not always a sign of depth. Sometimes it's a sign of instability. And then what happens? Slowly, things start to shift. Not dramatically, not obviously. Small changes, less attention, colder responses, a comment that doesn't feel right, a behavior that hurts. But because you remember the good version, you start justifying. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe I'm misunderstood. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm overthinking. And those maybes slowly become your prison. Here's a big mistake. Good people don't fall for behavior. They fall for potential. And that's one of the most dangerous things. You attach yourself to something that doesn't exist yet. You say, they're like this now, but they can become better. Deep down, they're a good person. They just need time. They just need someone who understands. But reality Relationships are not built on potential. They are built on reality. And the reality is, people rarely change, as much as we hope they will. So why don't you leave? This is where it gets serious. Because many think someone in a toxic relationship just doesn't realize it. But most of the time, they do. They know they're being hurt. They know something is wrong. They feel it, but they stay. Why? Because attachment is more complicated than it looks. How is attachment created? Not through stability, but through inconsistency. One day amazing, one day distant, one moment full attention, next moment silence, one time deep affection, next time coldness. That inconsistency locks the mind because your brain starts chasing the good moments. You stay hoping for that version again. You tell yourself, that's a real them. This is temporary. But the truth is, those good moments are part of the cycle, not a sign of change. Here's something rarely said. Good people often fear loneliness more than pain, so they stay in painful relationships just to avoid being alone, because loneliness feels like emptiness, heavy silence, facing yourself, and many people aren't ready for that, so they choose familiar pain over unfamiliar loneliness. The real problem is hope. Yes, hope is not always a good thing. Sometimes, hope becomes a trap. When you keep hoping someone will change, without real evidence, you're keeping yourself stuck in a place you should have left. Hope can become a chain. Why do strong people get stuck too? Because being strong means having a high tolerance, and high tolerance without boundaries turns into self-damage. The strongest people sometimes stay the longest because they believe they can fix it, because they don't want to give up, because they think endurance is strength. But sometimes leaving is not weakness, it's awareness. Here's a hard question. If your friend was in your exact situation and said, they hurt me, but I love them. I know it's not right, but I can't leave. What would you tell them? Be honest. Would you tell them to stay? Or would you say, look at what you're tolerating, this isn't love? Now say the same thing to yourself. A shift in perspective. A healthy relationship is not a place where you constantly explain yourself, not a place where you constantly doubt yourself, not a place where you feel like you're not enough. A healthy relationship is where you can be yourself and still be accepted, where you feel calm, not constantly anxious. So what's the solution? Not becoming cold, not losing trust, not stopping being a good person. The solution is this. Learn to have boundaries. What are boundaries? Knowing how much you can give, and when you're losing yourself, knowing when to be patient and when to stand firm, knowing that not everyone deserves your effort. A powerful realization. Some people don't become better with kindness. They just become better at taking advantage of it. It's harsh, but it's real. A simple but deep rule. If you notice that, you give more than you receive. You justify more than you enjoy. You doubt more than you feel safe. You silence yourself more than you express yourself. Then that place is not healthy. In the end, good people don't become victims because they are weak. They become victims because they don't know when to stop. And when you learn that, everything changes. You stop trying to figure out who to fix and start understanding where to stand. And in that moment, everything shifts. Not just your relationships. You change too. And from that point on, Not everyone gets access to you, because finally, you've learned where your value belongs.